First of all, I want to introduce Brock Pierce. Brock is an American entrepreneur, a chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, a former Disney child actor. He has been a pioneer in the entertainment, cryptocurrency, gaming, real estate, and philanthropic areas. He ran as an independent candidate in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. I also want to take the moment to thank him for being the sponsor of this event and for our networking meeting this evening. Brock, this is your opportunity.
I guess I'll take a couple of minutes to touch on a few areas of focus, one of which is I was a co-founder of Tether, and so we invented, or at least brought the first successful asset-backed stablecoin to market that's doing over $50 trillion a year in transactional volume. In our original business plan, we identified the idea of this technology being used by central banks, which has eventually led to the idea of a central bank digital currency. But the reason I bring it up is a point that's often lost as we talk about this sector and as we talk about issues of national security and otherwise, is that over 90% of all fiat or stable coins that settle in, call it this new economy, in these new markets, averaging more like 96 or 97%, settle in US dollars. Meaning the US dollar in the new economy for settlement of these types of transactions are in the high 90% sort of market share. And so as we think about what currencies the new economy are going to settle in as the sort of the old economy and the new economy touch and where those bridges, roads, and tunnels exist, the idea that the US dollar has this kind of market share from a US perspective is as good as we could ever hope for. Certainly as the Chinese have created the Chinese digital yuan, hoping to have this type of market share, and other currencies are utilized to settle in, call it this new economy, I think it's important we are aware of the market share that we have and we don't do anything to jeopardize it. We couldn't ask for a better position, and I often like to bring this up because I think it's lost on us, and I pray as we engage in legislative conversations that we don't inadvertently do something to jeopardize that reality. I also think it's worth talking briefly about some of the work that we've done internationally. I assume most of you, if not all of you, are aware of what happened a little over a year ago, September 7th of last year. El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender. We led the first formal delegation into the country, bringing 37 innovators, such as myself, there to assist the government of El Salvador and President Bukele with the implementation of that law, which we only had about 3 months to help make that happen. Brought multiple people for each of the, call it components necessary to make that law reality. Because of the aggressive timeline. 90 days to roll something out is aggressive for people like me in the startup world. I think generally unheard of when it comes to government, unless you're dealing with natural disasters or war. I'm talking to you from Puerto Rico right now, where we are in the midst of dealing with the disaster relief work related to the Hurricane Fiona, and now obviously Florida is undergoing a great deal of that with Ian as of last night. But I think what we've seen come out of El Salvador, and really sort of that big, bold step, is government interest in a way that is unprecedented, at least in my world. We created a new organization known as the United Council of Rising Nations, or unicorn.org. The idea is that unicorns from Silicon Valley it's not just a mythical animal, but a term that we use to describe the most successful of startups, the startups that have achieved, at least from a valuation perspective or metric, $1 billion or more. And the idea is that nation states, especially in the developing world, places like El Salvador, have the ability to tap into the, innovation and tools of transformation that come from those of us on the front lines of change. And that if the private and public sectors work together well, that sort of digital DNA, that entrepreneurial DNA, that startup sort of DNA can be had, and nations theoretically could be unicorns too. We don't just engage governments around the world. We're talking to over 40 nation states, their heads of state, their legislative branches of government, about just what can be done from a new economy perspective to drive financial inclusion, access to credit, payment systems, the stuff that just, remember, 2/3 of the world's population is on or underbanked. And so we often, take what we have for granted, because we don't realize how far behind some of the rest of the world is, and that these tools really have the ability to make life better all over the world. But we're also engaged in conversations as it relates to agriculture, water, energy, telecommunication, because there's innovation happening, pretty much across all sectors right now, and in these places, especially where they don't have the same incumbencies that exist. Africa, for example, is really well suited to leapfrog because they don't have sort of legacy infrastructure or incumbents that are challenging the status quo. For example, the reason El Salvador was able to do this is they don't have a central bank that can issue its own currency. And because they don't have access to the tools that most of the world has, they were more open-minded, or it was more of a necessity to find ways to access credit and capital in innovative ways. And so that's another thing that we're doing around the world at unicorn.org. And I think it's worth sort of bringing this back to the US as well, as this conversation's happening in the US Capitol. As we think about legislation, the Senate has put forward, or a bill has been put forward or proposed for US legislation as it relates to this industry. And generally, I think that's a good thing, having a background in venture and entrepreneurial sort of startups, because of the regulatory uncertainty that it's created. We've been losing a lot of our best and brightest. They've been leaving the US because they're unsure, if this is a safe place to build their business. Should they be moving to other countries? And capital doesn't like uncertainty. Capital likes certainty. And so, is the SEC the regulator? Is the CFTC the regulator? Is it FinCEN? And it's created a lot of confusion, which from a market perspective makes things challenging. So I think that what's been proposed here is actually quite good. I think bringing regulatory clarity to a single agency, in this instance the CFTC, I think would make things easier for everyone. I think the idea that they've talked about of transactions under $200 not being taxed, so that you can buy a cup of coffee without having to worry about accounting for it and paying your taxes on these, call it small transactions. So I think that's a good progression, and I think the conversation is important. I think that what has made America great, the American dream, is really that we're the capital of innovation. We're the country where you can actually go attempt to build something new, and you can fail, and we still pat you on the back if you did it with integrity and encourage you to do it again. That is not true throughout most of the world. And when we talk about what really has made America great, is the entrepreneurial nature of our nation, where we allow failure. And it doesn't matter where you're born or from what class or who your parents are. If you're willing to work hard, this is the land of opportunity. And I think it's imperative that America continues to stay the capital of innovation. And as we're living through this sort of fourth industrial revolution, it's imperative to me, which is why I spend the time in DC that I do, and engaging in government conversations, where most people with my background are generally allergic to governments and bureaucracy, just because we tend to operate outside of the box. And so I've had to spend a fair amount of time learning how to translate and learn how to facilitate conversations, call it between the left and the right, which I do politically as well. Though I do think that I think at a state level, it's worth pointing out what's happening. I think in a lot of ways, we might be best served as a country if a lot of this experimentation or these regulatory sandboxes were being created at a state level, because it allows for various forms. We can test multiple boxes to be sure of what's working before implementing it at a federal level. I think some federal clarity at a high level is good. I think using the states as sandboxes to try multiple things so that we get it right, the law of unintended consequences. If we get this wrong and we push this sort of change and innovation outside of our borders, I think it would have a long-term catastrophic effect on our collective future, which I deeply care about. And so these are just a couple of sort of high-level concepts that I share as insights that I've gathered through, call it my time, talking to governments around the world, locally, at a state level, federally, as well as internationally. What I see happening from a stablecoin perspective, the implications of what that could mean as a national security issue, and really how well off we are. And I think how grateful we should be that we, have such a dominant position in that space. And that I think, we can continue to lead as we have. Most of the innovation in this sector has come from Americans, whether they're still living in America or not. And I hope to keep it that way. So thank you so much for having me. Carla will take wonderful care of you as my former vice presidential running mate and principal of the Pierce School, which is where we'll be hosting tonight. It was built in 1894, named after the 14th president of the United States, Franklin Pierce, and it's got a rich history. It was Dwight Howard's house when he used to play for the Wizards in D.C. before they transferred him to the Lakers, and look forward to hosting you this evening in this historical home where we come together, as I like to say, classes in session, where we can have safe conversations between the public, private, left, right, NGOs and otherwise about our collective future. So thank you so much for having me.
Happy to enjoy your home this evening. So we'd like to actually have Carla come up and just also say a few words, if that's okay with you, Brock.
Oh, of course. Carla is well spoken.
I'd like to take
and
I'm going to, I'm not sure that we got some echo. I want to say just a couple words about Brock and Carla. I had the great privilege of meeting Brock and Carla just recently. And in fact, my wife, Catherine, will attest to this. When we walked away from that, we said, oh my gosh, these people have the same values we have. And we just instantly fell in love with Brock's mission, his heart, and the people that he surrounded himself with. One of them is Carla. And so I've asked Carla to come up and say a few words to sort of represent the Brock organization and maybe tell you a little bit about Ying. In fact, her business that she has is all about skill sharing, and it really embodies the attitude, the characteristics, which is really about consensus, right? Collaborating, bringing people together, really with love and a desire to just do great good in the world. So the Brock organization, Carla, we are humbly inviting you to come, and so thankful that they're the ones that really made this possible, right? If it hadn't been for them sort of stepping up and providing some of the support they did, this event would have been very difficult to pull off. And I can't thank you enough. And please speak.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been quite a wonderful journey, I think, for Brock and I, when we started to say yes to having the opportunity to represent sort of maybe, I guess, the younger generation of the political party, and one that was definitely right down the middle. That was an opportunity for us to kind of make a statement. After that, we said we didn't win the White House, but we won the real house. And that's the one that you're going to come and visit this evening. And the reason why we choose that is really because we believe the time is now for this country to say yes to figuring out how do we cross the bridge? How do we begin to create bridges in a way that really can make a statement about unification? And the time is now, period. The other piece of this is blockchain, right? Web3. This is an opportunity for us to say yes to what this country can truly stand on as we talk about the new innovation that needs to happen. It's not a moment where we can wait anymore. I think Brock articulated so clearly, and he knows I always get excited when he speaks about this opportunity to leverage the blockchain in a way that we can now build bridges like we've never done before. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but yes, thank you, Gerard and Kathy, for giving me a chance to also talk about the bridge that we're building with Ying. It's a peer-to-peer group skill sharing platform. We are leveraging the blockchain. The new one that's going to be coming out has a community wallet, or I'm sorry, a digital wallet tied to it. So many things I can go into. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But I just want to say welcome to our home this evening. We are excited to host you. And to my brother Brock, who is there, I think it's extraordinary for us to be able to dive in. So we open up our home to other conversations that you all might want to hold in the future. So thank you so much. Now, I don't know if we have time for questions for Brock. Is that? Yeah, Brock, are you open for that?
I'm
Awesome.
always happy to answer questions.
Can we have a microphone here in the center? If you could also then stand in behind in the line, that way it makes it easy.
Thank you, Brock. I'd love to hear more about the skills, because I believe organization of people and talent towards verified skills, because that's the biggest problem right now. Nobody knows who knows what. Are you gearing these towards specific end certifications and things of that nature to drive kind of workforce towards the goals that BMM and others are trying to do out there? These different protocols and like.
Well, I mean, from a skills perspective, I'm not sure I fully understand, the question being asked or where we're trying to drive things to, but, obviously anytime you have a new industry, an emerging industry where lots of wealth is being created and where substantial growth is, you get one major problem that occurs, which is where the charlatans really emerge from, which is that there's an asymmetry of information. And when there's a substantial asymmetry of information, it's very easy for bad actors to come in, which is where some of the controversy, comes from, which is that you've got people taking advantage of those that don't know by those that see opportunity to do that. And so, how do you start to understand who's credible? That starts to change as this industry's kind of gone through what the internet did in 1999. As an industry matures and as we go through each one of these cycles, call it the market, the fast followers and the later adopters, go through the process of paying tuition, which is why I never advise anyone to invest, in these asset classes. I advise people to invest in themselves, in their own knowing. Because when you're an informed individual, it's hard for people to take advantage of you. When you choose to blindly follow and haven't done the work, these are when things, might go well for you, but often do not. And so, as we also think how technology, not just this industry, is also transforming the world in which we live, there's going to be this whole process of reskilling, the workforce. The robots and AIs are changing the landscape of work, and rapidly, at a rate that is faster than most people are really paying attention. And the things that we do are going to change as a result of that. I think it's actually a very good thing. I know some would paint a dystopian future. I would argue that there are some of us that live to work because we love what we do. We're living our passion, or is what the Japanese would call our sort of ikigai. And then there are many that work to live. And I think that as we start to give people the freedom to actually figure out what it is that they wish to do rather than what they feel they have to do, I think that, some maybe not utopian comes out of it, but something beautiful, can emerge from this challenge or opportunity that exists ahead. And another area in which government clearly can play a role is how do we make it easy to reskill a workforce, especially at a time where so many don't want to work. It's a very sort of real problem that has emerged through the disruption of COVID, and all of the sort of money that's been handed out is actually getting people back to work. But I think it's a beautiful thing as well. All of these things are challenges, and as with that opportunity where people get to break their habits, break patterns, and to hopefully stop for a moment and think for themselves, to think about what kind of future they'd like. And one, collectively through this sort of process of consensus, how do we co-create a world in which we all wish to live, and one where we can all win? I do believe that something along those lines is possible.
Hi, my name is Niran Saraf, and Brock, I'm interested in, since you're in Puerto Rico, and I actually have family in Puerto Rico, and they're really tired of the lack of accountability with all the aid they're getting, and disaster in, disaster out, and so same problem, no electricity infrastructure broken. Do you think blockchain and a role that you can play in allowing this to be resolved? Very philosophical question, but I'm interested in hearing your views about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, what does this technology do? In a lot of ways, I think it brings accountability to places that are lacking it. It brings transparency to, again, places that are lacking it. And with that, a lot of efficiency, as well as, kind of equal access and opportunity, democratization of systems. So at its core, I think the answer is yes. I've been working in Puerto Rico for nearly a decade, living here for over 6 years. I came here basically or about 6 years right after Hurricane Maria, with the hope of bringing these technologies, to Puerto Rico and making a positive impact with technology. I tend to do more of that work with places outside of Puerto Rico because we've just never really gotten it done. But clearly the infrastructure is a problem here at the energy level. Clearly people have been without water, and I'm not even sure how much of that is as a result of the hurricane itself versus faulty infrastructure that has been in need of being upgraded long before the hurricane hit. And I think at a high level, one of the ways that you can do that is, and also, as a world, this isn't a Puerto Rico, sort of limited to Puerto Rico, but how do we build more resilient infrastructure? Decentralization, or what you could argue, distributed systems by nature do that. That's what the foundation of this is it's built to be highly secure and resilient. And so let's talk about an energy grid. Centralized power grids are vulnerable to all sorts of, sort of system failures, nefarious actors, or just, something in the system breaking down. Obviously, as we think about clean energy solutions and how you have a more resilient distributed grid, Puerto Rico, with its abundant sunlight, is really well suited for. I could conceivably see Puerto Rico upgrade this fairly quickly, if the right decisions were made to support it, which doesn't have to include blockchain, right? The blockchain is not required to implement solutions. It's one argument, and I think probably the best one. But there are multiple ways to solve these problems, and I like to point out that there are multiple ways to solve for financial inclusion. The blockchain is not the only answer to it, but it happens to be the one that I favor because it's my preferred system and the one I know best. But I think that yes, there's tremendous opportunity here. Now the issue of why something doesn't get done in the short term is at a state level. You have a governor and a legislative branch of government in Puerto Rico that are of two opposing political parties, and often, like we see more broadly in the United States, is when opposing political parties are, controlling, in this case, the executive and legislative branches of government, not much gets done. Puerto Rico has 78 municipalities, and so things can conceivably be done at the municipal level. I do work across Puerto Rico, but the main area of focus for me as of late has been in the island of Vieques. There's two populated islands to the east of Puerto Rico, Culebra and Vieques. The Vieques is where the Navy used to do a lot of its bomb testing. They stopped that about 20 years ago. And when the last major hurricane hit, Hurricane Maria, Vieques went 1 year without electricity. It's gone now about 6 years without a functioning hospital. It didn't have water for weeks. It's unemployment. I mean, if I just start walking you through all the statistics of Vieques, it's heartbreaking, and you would not believe that this is happening in the United States. And so I recently, about 8 months ago, bought the former W Hotel in Vieques, not because I wanted to be in the hospitality business or run a big hotel, but I got tired of telling people to buy it and fix it because it is the economic heart of the island. There's a population of less than 10,000 people, and it creates 500 direct and indirect jobs. And if you want to start to see a thriving Vieques, it's the only, sort of substantial business or even potential business left on the island. And for years, I kept encouraging people to do something. And when I can't convince people to do something that must get done, I eventually throw up my hands and say, I'll do it myself. I'm also active in the RFP process right now, working with the government to fix the hospital, which is something that FEMA, refunds later. It's complicated. Again, I'm not in the business of building hospitals, but it's imperative that that gets done. And I'm looking at effectively all of the issues. My foundation, the Brock Pierce Foundation, I think is what is listed here, but I have a foundation here in Puerto Rico called Integro. In Spanish, depending upon the inflection, it means integration and integrity, there being the idea. We've supported over 250 nonprofits. We've been active in the late stages of Maria. We were very active in Hurricane Dorian, specifically in Abacos. And I can tell you, because that's the part of the Bahamas that got hit the hardest. More or less wiped out, bodies everywhere. And very few NGOs were actually coming to Abacos. They'd fly into the capital, take out a shovel, get a picture, and leave. On the grittiest, most challenged part of what happened in Dorian, there were not many. Even my assistant ended up making 10,000 meals a day and leading the kitchen efforts, and we built a lot of the early housing. And again, this isn't my background. I'm a digital entrepreneur and sort of angel in VC. The things that I'm talking about are areas where I have no historic skill, and I've been going through the process of paying tuition and learning, which it's really hard at first, and with time you get good at these things. And we got very involved in the relief efforts here in Puerto Rico when the earthquakes hit down in the south. We were also involved in some of the activities early in COVID, and we've been incredibly active here in Puerto Rico since Fiona hit. The good news is that this was no Maria. And I'm grateful that it wasn't worse than it was. Maria was devastating and for years, and loss of life and everything else. Not to say that things are good. There's very real damage and challenge here, but it was no Maria, and grateful for that. A lot of the issues are old infrastructure and things that need to be fixed, irrespective of if a hurricane comes. These are just things that should be done. And some of the other things I've talked about. The real impact here was in basically flood zones, places where housing probably shouldn't be built, that's very vulnerable to these types of storms and not built to code. And then also really in the south and the southwest, where the earthquake sort of damages had not been fully recovered. And then obviously when water and power is out, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. That's hard on everyone. And so the good news is I think Puerto Rico will recover from this in a relatively, in a reasonable time frame. This isn't a Maria, thank God. And so, for anyone that wants to come spend any time in Puerto Rico, interested in any of these things, we work tirelessly down here, and we've farming. We do everything. And by the way, the reason that is probably because we haven't got the technological sort of legislation and things, the things that needed to be implemented to do what I'm really good at, and which I'm effectively having to do elsewhere. And so with all that free time, I've gotten into, ports and airports and energy grids and agriculture and, hospitality. I've effectively, tried to learn everything else that can be, helpful here, because I do live my life fully in service.
I have some unfortunate news, and that is that we have run out of time. Apparently, the National Press Club has a banquet here in this room, and they have to be able to turn it over in the next hour and a half for that banquet. So, Brock, thank you very much for giving us your time.